Welcome once again, my friends, to MOTH News Live. My name is Philip O'Connor, and together with my colleague Keith Walsh and the rest of the team, we're here to bring you between the lines, behind the scenes of the stories that are shaping our world. Now, please be aware that some viewers and listeners may find some of the issues raised in today's broadcast upsetting, as we will be talking about instances of sexual abuse. It's an area in which Ireland hasn't exactly covered itself in glory, both in terms of the initial incidents and how they are followed up on. In recent times, the so-called Grace case has been in the news. That case centred on a young woman with profound intellectual disabilities who was left in a foster home in the southeast despite a succession of allegations of physical and sexual abuse. A decision was made to remove Grace from that home in 1995, but staggeringly, that decision was overturned a year later and she was returned there. She stayed in the home until 2009. A recent report into that case said that it was not satisfied that bruises Grace suffered had been sustained during physical abuse, and it did not establish that Grace had been subject to sexual abuse. But the report also does not answer why Grace was returned to the home, and no one person is identified as having made that decision. In another shocking case, Caitlin Hassan was assaulted while in care, which left her deeply traumatised, and that led to this statement from Senator Tom Clonan in Ireland's Shannon.
Minister, thank you for coming in. I want to raise here again the case of Caitlin Hassan, and Caitlin's mum, Louise Hassan, is here in the visitors gallery. Caitlin Hassan was sexually assaulted while in the care of Avista Healthcare. Since the assault, she has had no supports and is currently at home with Louise. Caitlin is deeply traumatised and cannot dress or get out of the bed. She is a young woman who has been completely failed by the state in exactly the same way as the Grace case.
I ask you to refrain from using names in the House. Thank you.
Okay, so I have the full consent of Louise and Caitlin Hassan, and this is the matter that has been covered on the public record in all of the national newspapers and on RTE, the national broadcaster. All of the parties have been named and all of the detail has been published. And this is the reason why we're here, because here is a family that has been completely failed by the state, and in order to get some sort of support, we have to, as many victims of sexual assault do, renounce their anonymity in order to get the help and the support that they need. On the publication of the Grace case, the Minister, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, all repeatedly asserted that this would never ever happen again in this state. It is happening right now, today, on your watch. It's happening to Caitlin Hassan. Now, the multidisciplinary team in Avista published a comprehensive report on the supports that Caitlin needs.
There you go, a clip featuring Senator Tom Clonan speaking to the Irish Shannon about the case of Caitlin Hassan. And with us to discuss these allegations and why this keeps happening in Ireland is Caoimhe Haughey, the solicitor who's represented the Hassan family and indeed Caitlin herself. Caoimhe, you're very welcome to MOTH News. Could I maybe start by asking you just to outline some of the details, if you can, of the allegations around Caitlin that our family is making?
Good morning, Philip. Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege, and I'm here today to speak for and on behalf of Caitlin and Louise. It's much appreciated that you've given us this opportunity. So just by way of background, Caitlin is a 27-year-old young woman. She was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum disorder some years ago. She has a mild intellectual disability and a mild speech disorder. Other than that, she's a very robust young woman, enjoys many activities, and is a wonderful girl, and obviously herself and her mother are very close. Louise is a single mom, has reared Caitlin from the beginning and has been there as a carer, a mother and a support for Caitlin. So back in December of 2019, which I suppose we all will remember as the last Christmas before the pandemic and COVID, Louise had a very unfortunate accident where she very badly broke her leg in two places, which meant that she was immobilized, literally in a wheelchair and in a brace on her leg. As a result of that, it was decided that for both their sakes, Caitlin would go into respite into a facility run by a Vista, which is the former Daughters of Charity, as you probably are aware, in North Dublin City, I should say. And in that context, Caitlin had been a service user of the Vista facilities in respect of day services and respite. But the situation was slightly different, and I suppose in December of 19, she was supposed to be in for respite, but that would mean you come home, you come out, you come home. But then, unfortunately, then obviously with COVID hitting and the lockdown restrictions, etc., by March of 2020, the situation dramatically changed for Caitlin and Louise, insofar as Louise was not able to physically interact with Caitlin. So visiting her, seeing her was literally through a window, Philip. And this went on for all those months that we'll all remember, with lockdowns and travel restrictions. And we'll all remember about nursing homes, people having to visit and talk to their loved ones through windows. This is exactly what Louise was reduced to. But if I can say this, Caitlin is a young woman with disabilities, and she's not. It's not a situation which is usual. So this was very distressing for Louise. In other words, her daughter is now in a care facility where Louise really had no oversight, wasn't able to see the day-to-day. She would go and visit Louise through a window. The weather wasn't good. She offered to get a gazebo to put up, just to make it a little bit more, cozy for herself and for her daughter. That was refused. So this was a very difficult period all through, from March 2020 and on, whilst Caitlin remained in respite because of COVID. So if we could move then towards the end of December 2020, December, and there was an incident where Caitlin alleged that she was quite violently, physically assaulted by a care worker in this respite centre. She made contact with her mother, which was only obviously by mobile phone at that stage. And indeed, the way Louise was able to contact with the facility was also by mobile phone and using a sort of WhatsApp facility. So obviously Louise was very concerned. Caitlin was in a lot of distress, very tearful. And that led to an investigation, including by the Gardaí, and an internal investigation by the facility. However, because there were no witnesses to the incident, which apparently allegedly involved a hairbrush, whereby it is alleged that Caitlin was beaten with the hairbrush. But in any event, the guards investigated, it was taken seriously, but because there were no witnesses to the incident, in other words, it was Caitlin's word versus this healthcare worker's word, it went no further. However, as anybody can understand, with this having happened in a care setting where there really is no control by the mom in relation to what's happening on a day-to-day basis, Louise's, concerns were heightened, shall we say, to say the least. And following on from that, Louise would ask questions and seek, updates as to how Caitlin was getting on. And she was met with a lot of resistance, Philip, and sort of, you're a nuisance and you're annoying us and we don't like the tone of your messages, etc., etc. So around this time then in 2021, Caitlin would report to her mom that she was uncomfortable, shall we say, with particular healthcare workers, male healthcare workers in the facility. And I suppose just to go back, it's important to note that Caitlin was the only resident in this facility alongside another male resident of much older years. And the main healthcare workers who were caring for both Caitlin and this gentleman were male. So Caitlin started to express an uncomfortableness or discomfort with a particular male healthcare worker. Louise again tried to raise this legitimately, obviously with concern arising out of the previous incident in the December, which, by the way, took a long time to investigate. It was months and months and months before a final decision was made. So, during that period, again, Louise Louise's anxiety is heightened. What's going to be the outcome of this? How is this going to be managed? What about safeguarding? What are we going to do? What about Caitlin's care plan? So all of this was kind of left up in the air. So anyway, as I said, Caitlin was reporting this discomfiture with regard to a particular healthcare worker, male healthcare worker. It was reported, it was brought to the attention of the facilities, senior management, etc., etc. It was received and it was, shall we say, somewhat investigated, but it was dismissed. And a situation started to evolve, Philip, which is extremely concerning. And this is where I see a lot of similarities concerningly with the Grace case. Louise was started to be sort of questioned, and what she was saying was being undermined. She was being gaslit, for want of a better word. And it was kind of a situation, well, if you don't want your daughter here and you don't want to avail of services, well, you can take her away. So this mom is in a situation, what do I do? You know, this is the only service that my child is used to, my adult child is used to. It's what she's familiar with. You know, to take her out of it, to try and get something else. Will I get something else? You know, there was this balancing up, what is the best? What do I do? You know, her moral conscience, her ethical conscience is pricking at her going, what do I do? What's best for my daughter? So she played along, shall we say. And then she was made to sign a document, Philip, that she didn't have any concerns, or that any concerns with regard to this male health worker were not, you know, anything that needed anything to be done about, so to speak. So in other words, she was put into a situation of it's either this or that. Okay. So unfortunately then, coming into the autumn of 2021, the situation with this male healthcare worker escalated. And Louise made a number of reports about Caitlin crying, not wanting him to be there when she was there, not wanting him to be on duty, not wanting him to be dealing with her, not liking the fact that he was touching her stuff in her bedroom. All these kind of, I suppose in hindsight, one would think red flags. But Louise kind of was trying to deal with it as best as she could, again, balancing up, my daughter needs this care, these facilities, this service, you know, what do I do? But anyway, unfortunately then in November of 2021, again, the situation escalated where poor Caitlin was manifesting sort of physical symptoms of itching, to be honest with you, Philip. And initially, innocently, of course, Louise thought, well, perhaps I'm using the wrong washing powder to wash her clothes, you know. But in any event, it did lead to a consultation with the family general practitioner, and Caitlin has been attending this particular family practice for many, many years, so they're very familiar with her. And without going into the details because of the sensitivity, the doctor in question was alarmed by what was being reported and how Caitlin presented to this GP on this particular day. And as a result, Louise was advised to immediately report matters to the Gardaí. So following that, the Gardaí were contacted. The Avista facility obviously a report was made. Poor Caitlin then had to engage in a very distressing process of being interviewed by Garda detectives of the sexual assault unit. She had to attend the Rotunda sexual assault unit for physical examination, testing, blood testing for sexual diseases, you know, so it was a horrendous time for herself and her mother. And Louise, you know, looks back at that time and just feels that she was in a spin with everything that was going on. So in the midst of the Garda investigation, which took quite a long time to be completed, Avista decided to set up then their own investigation, and they hired an external company called Acrux to essentially do a report. Now, this is the right thing to do, I suppose, Philip, but when you see what's happened with the Grace case, it's the right thing to do, but it's how you do it and how you go about it is what's important. I mean, what we've heard in the Dáil and a number of people repeating it, TDs and politicians, is that the person at the heart of, this investigation, the person at the heart of it should be the victim. And in this situation, I can honestly say, with what I have witnessed and seen over the last 3.5 years, Caitlin is not and has not been at the heart of this investigation. And you will be shocked to hear that whilst Caitlin and her mother fully participated in this investigation, had to be essentially interrogated as to the allegations that were being made, and what the background to them, the timing of them, the nature of them, very in-depth questions for a young woman who's 27 years of age now, who does suffer. She is on the autistic spectrum. She has a mild intellectual disability, and she has a mild speech disorder. So a very, very difficult situation for her. And she was interviewed on her own.
Is that not, sorry to interrupt you, Caoimhe, but as a solicitor, when you hear that, right, there's a number of things that you've raised there, and thank you for that very comprehensive description of the first part of the case, and I know there's more to come. But as a solicitor, if you have an independent investigator, there's two things, we spoke about a little bit about red flags, right? If I have a business and something goes wrong and I'm the one paying the investigators, how independent is that? And the second thing is that if you do have a person on the autism spectrum with mild intellectual disabilities, surely, I've never heard of a case whereby that person would be interviewed on their own and that would have any sort of credibility whatsoever. It's just not the done thing. The police wouldn't do it. The Gardaí wouldn't do it. It's just not done. And I've worked on a case recently, which hasn't actually come out here in Sweden, where a similar thing has happened. And it's not an investigation that they're looking for. What they're looking for is to undermine those people making the allegations. Is that how you as a solicitor, at what point did you become involved? Was that before or after this investigation? And how would you see that? Would you like to have accompanied your client in that interview?
Yeah, well, 100%. And thank you for asking that. So I suppose I should also clarify. So Louise came to me via Care Champions, which is a wonderful voluntary organization that came about really because of COVID and, the enormous difficulties people in nursing homes were suffering, firstly the residents in nursing homes and then their families. And then obviously Care Champions would support families who have, loved ones in residential care facilities. So Louise had very much reached out to Magella Beattie in Care Champions, who was a huge support to her and gave her a lot of help and guidance. And I should say as well, Louise is an amazing woman, Philip. She is so strong. She's hugely articulate. She's a very bright lady. She's doing a PhD at the moment, so this is a lady who knows when things are wrong. She's a tiger mom in respect of protecting her daughter. But all the time she was being undermined, she was being gaslit, and but for the fact of support from Care Champions and kind of guiding her with regard to HSE policies, safeguarding legislation, appropriate steps, she was able to make some, I suppose, what would you say, submissions as to how this process was been undertaken. But yes, the issue is here, this is a woman who is vulnerable. This is not an adult of, the usual going into a situation. This is a vulnerable adult woman who needs all the support possible. And my view is, and having come to help Louise at a stage where this process was ongoing, the Avista process was ongoing, it took almost 3 years to complete, Philip. 3 years. Incredible. But so I came along at a stage when it was still ongoing, and I was helping Louise with other matters, more specifically the fact that the relationship between Louise and the Avista facility had broken down. Louise was being accused of hostile behaviour. Louise was being accused of impacting staff members and causing them to leave the employment simply because she was raising questions about her daughter, Philip. She was asking for communication, and given what had happened to her daughter, I'm sorry, but I think she had every right to be more vigilant, to be asking more questions, and to be, seeking a higher duty of care because her daughter had already suffered. But in any event, this Avista investigation, it was done very much behind closed doors. I wasn't involved in that, but look, that's where we are now. But as I said, it took ages for this investigation report to come to light. And in addition to that, it was given to the Gardaí as part of their investigation, which came to the conclusion there was not sufficient evidence to proceed with the prosecution against the alleged offender. But here's the thing. So finally, when we were being told And I don't believe that we were being told things when other people were being told things, other vested interests. We were told the Avista report was just about to be completed, and then all of a sudden, bang, no, it's going to be set aside. It's not being relied upon. You're never going to see it, and you're never going to get it. The alleged offender has questioned the fair procedures, the due process in relation to how this investigation was conducted. We've called in a senior counsel who's done a desktop review, Philip, a desktop review. Never met Caitlin, never met her mother, and decided, no, we're setting the report aside. It's flawed. We can't rely on it. It will never see the light of day.
Can I just interrupt you there, Caitlin? So this is where I'm going, because this is exactly what's happened in this case that I'm dealing with a sports club here in Sweden. Exactly the same thing has happened, right? The report was produced and then disappeared. And again, it's because now everybody has a right to a good name. Everybody has a right to due process, but everybody also has a right to justice. Every parent, every child, and particularly our most vulnerable citizens, right? So this is something that does occur. Why do you think, because it's up to them, they have all the material, they have conducted all the interviews and they've conducted all the research and everything, I'm sure they'd say this, right? But why then do they get to decide? I mean, presumably it's because they're the ones paying for it, that this should just be shelved, that this last 3.5 years of interviews and research, that thing should be shelved. Is there no legal recourse for Caitlin and for her family and for Louise to say, no, we want this. We have been part of this now. We took part in this process in good faith. We didn't produce a report, but it's about our, I mean, is there even a sort of a GDPR incident there where she could say, I want to see what's been written about me in this report?
Yeah, there absolutely. Unfortunately, and we obviously looked into that at the time, and I'm glad you asked this because I definitely wanted to come onto this topic. So the whole investigation was structured and based and platformed on a trust in care. I mean, this makes me laugh now, Philip. A trust in care policy document from the HSE. Bear in mind, Avista is a Section 38 provider. So whilst it's a charitable organisation with its own governance and independence, it is funded by the HSE under Section 38 of the Health Act. In any event, the trust in care policy is the document from which the investigation was, upon which the investigation was based. And in that document, there is no provision for the victim allowing access to the report. Now, by the same token, this policy doesn't say you can't have it, but we have been met with every possible resistance in relation to getting access to this report. And we have been told that if you want to take it to court, off you go. We're never going to see it, but this is what's really concerning about this, Philip. So Caitlin and her mom can't see it, but it has been handed to the guards, and it has no doubt is on the desk of every single defendant party in relation to Caitlin's civil action. And I'm making that assumption. I don't have proof, but I'm happy to make that assumption for this reason. Once the first investigation by ACRUX was set aside, without any consultation with Caitlin or her mother, it was decided to set up a de novo investigation with new investigators, new terms of reference, all paid for by Avista. We had no input whatsoever into the choice, to the terms of reference, how it should proceed. We were just presented again a fait accompli. We reluctantly agreed, with an abundance of caution, to participate in the early stages. However, together with independent advice from barristers who I work with on a regular basis, we had huge concerns about the way this new de novo investigation was being conducted. I don't wish to be disrespectful to anybody involved in this process. It's the process that we had the problem with, and the way the process was set up again. So what happened then was we had meetings, we had a lot of exchange of correspondence, we set out our concerns, some of them were taken on board, most of them weren't. And crucially, Philip, when we sought to have the legal representation and very extensive legal advice that Caitlin was going to need, and her mom, because her mom was going to be a witness, we were told, you're not getting paid for any of that. So meanwhile, the offender and everybody else around him, Avista, everybody else, is getting legal services, extensive legal advice paid for by the state, The victim in all of this is just left to her own devices to come up with matching resources in a David and Goliath situation to make sure she has the best advice and the best legal team at her disposal. So in the end, Philip, it was a hard decision, and it was a very considered decision. It kept me up at night, morally, ethically. What is the best thing for Caitlin? But we decided not to participate ultimately in that investigation. And then we were told it was confidential and it was not to be discussed with third parties or outside the framework. But yet it's mentioned openly in court only last March. And what has been now told is that this investigation, de novo investigation report, which we haven't participated in, when that report is made available, it is going to be used by the state, the Minister for Children, the HSE and Avista in their defence of Caitlin's legal action. Now, I just can't get my head around all of this, Philip, to be quite honest with you. The way this has been handled, it's again, David and Goliath. We have a victim and her mother who have just been treated so appallingly from the get-go in this process. And it's still going on. And then with the revelations of the Farrelly Commission and the way the Grace case has been investigated, it's just sending chills down my spine.
We've seen minister after minister, politician after politician stand up in the Dáil and in some cases in the Seanad and say never again, and say, oh, that was the culture at the time, we're sorry, things are changing. The famous line in Irish politics, mistakes were made, not I made a mistake or we made a mistake, but mistakes were made. And yet this keeps on happening. Could you just outline for us the case that Caitlin is now going to take against the state and the HSE and the care provider? What is the basis of that case? What are you looking for from the state and from the provider?
Yeah. So it's a civil case, obviously, Phillips, because the criminal aspect of things, that door is now closed. So what we're bringing a case for negligence against the perpetrator, the alleged offender, perpetrator, against Avista, against the HSE, the Minister, Ireland and the Attorney General. Now it is a case based on injuries of a physical and sexual nature alleged for Caitlin, but it also includes detailed particulars of the failure of the duty of care on the part of the service provider, which also it would involve the HSE and the Minister for Children. Because, Philip, Louise reported her concerns up the line and in every direction to the Minister for Health, the Minister for Children, the Minister for Disabilities, to the Ombudsman, to HICWA. She reported everything to everybody possible. But yet she has been left with in a situation, oh, your letter's receiving attention. Thank you for your correspondence being passed to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And that's the way it's been managed. So the only recourse really for Caitlin and her mom was to bring this civil action. And as I said, it is seeking compensation and obviously a vindication of Caitlin at the end of it, a finding that she has been the victim of alleged sexual, physical and sexual abuse, and also an egregious failing of a duty of care. When this didn't, in other words, you bring a case sometimes because of negligence, because something has happened out of the blue. But this is a situation which was ongoing, and Louise had highlighted her concerns vis-a-vis the care that Caitlin was receiving whilst in respite, but they fell on deaf ears, and then the inevitable happened. And now she's being punished, in my respectful opinion, and being retaliated against, Louise this is, and penalised for doing what she has done.
How does a single mother and her daughter with who is on the autism spectrum and with a mild intellectual disabilities, when you go to court and you sue individuals and you sue the Irish state and that kind of thing, this is a very expensive process. As you mentioned, the state is going to fund the defence of this particular individual and of the care provider and indeed of themselves, the Attorney General. How are you going to fund this? And what evidence do you think you'll be able to put before the courts that makes you believe that this could be successful?
Okay, well, I suppose for your listeners, and I'm sure you know this anyway, Philip, the burden of proof or the standard of proof in criminal law and civil law is very different. So it's all, beyond a reasonable doubt, obviously in the criminal law, whereas in the law of negligence, the civil law, it's on the balance of probabilities. So in simple language, it's like plus 51%. You have to demonstrate to the court, persuade the court that your side of the evidence is the fact and that the court should hold with you. So what we're hoping to achieve is obviously a finding in favour of Caitlin, and the evidence that we will be submitting to the court will obviously be Caitlin's own testimony, her mother's testimony of expert witnesses, including doctors, specialist doctors who have been treating and looking after Caitlin over the last number of years, and documentary evidence. We'll be going back obviously through all the Garda information, all the interrogation documents. I mean, there's a massive amount of paperwork that will compile a lot of documentary evidence in this case. But obviously any civil case of this nature, it is a personal injury case, Philip, it is based on viva voce evidence in the first instance. So in other words, the court will expect to hear oral testimony from the witnesses, i.e. Caitlin and her mom.
Is it likely that the defence could produce either one of these reports that have been made out of the hat in their own defence? And if so, will they have to disclose the report to you before they produce it in court?
Well, yes. I mean, we will get to a stage in advance of the trial where we'll have a better idea of what the evidence is going to be on either side. But the way this particular action has been set up, it's not subject to the usual disclosure rules that apply. I'm sorry now if I'm sounding like the lawyer lecturer here, but that we do have a system that came in many, many years ago to stop this trial by ambush in the civil law, but unfortunately it doesn't apply in the way we have set up Caitlin's case, because it does concern sexual assault and trespass of her bodily integrity, constitutional law issues. So the way it's been set up, these disclosure rules won't apply. So we are on risk of, rabbits being pulled out of the hat as we go along, but we will be engaging in a lengthy discovery process to try and elicit as much information as we can. And I can assure you, I am determined to get to the bottom of how the Acrux report, which we are not allowed to see, has gone into the hands of the Gardaí. That does not add up in my book, and I'm determined to find that out. If that's via the Minister for Children's Office, the HSE, the Attorney General's Office, whatever it is, I intend to find that out.
On that subject of the Gardaí and them deciding not to prosecute, there was a very high-profile case that happened back in last autumn when an Irish athlete was found guilty of assault against a named woman, and the Gardaí decided in that case not to prosecute. I remember speaking to the Gardaí at the time, and there was overwhelming physical evidence, but they sort of made the decision that they just weren't going to get the conviction, and therefore, as you mentioned previously, the burden of proof is so much higher in a criminal case. Do you have any idea, have the Gardaí ever explained to you why they decided not to take a criminal case? Do they think that Caitlin might not be a credible witness? Did they not have the physical evidence that they needed? Because they set a very high bar for cases like this often in criminal terms.
Yeah, again, yes, I think all the points you've made there are correct, and I'm obviously very familiar with the case you're talking about. So the physical evidence would obviously be a huge factor, and in this instance, for poor Caitlin, by the time she attended the sexual assault unit in the Rotunda Hospital, there wasn't actually any physical evidence, and if I may not go into any more sort of sensitive detail in that regard. So it was really what Caitlin was verbally reporting and how she was responding to questions. So ultimately, the guards decided, essentially the phrase was, there was insufficient evidence, having done their investigation. And I can read out here a letter from the guards of July 2023. And it says, the Gardaí have completed their investigation, sent the investigation file. The file included the Garda specialist interviews with Caitlin, the statements taken as part of the investigation, a report from the sexual assault unit, a report from the Forensic Science Ireland, FSI, doctors consultation notes in relation to Caitlin, documents from Vista, and the Acrux report. It also included caution statements from the alleged offender. But ultimately, and indeed, there was also DVD interviews taken of the interviews with Caitlin, which were also analysed independently. And it was ultimately decided that, as I said, there was insufficient evidence. Here's a quote here: "The evidence was not strong enough," according to the guards. So I think you're right. I think they're approaching it from the perspective, the DPP's office, can we secure a conviction?
When you zoom out, Caoimhe, this is something that you and I and people of our generation have grown up with as it was brought out into the open. Cases like this, incidents like this, not just in care homes, but also in foster homes, in mother and baby homes, in boarding schools and parish churches around the country. When you look at the tools that are available to you as a solicitor, as a jurist, as a legal representative, why do we keep failing people like Caitlin and Louise? Why can we not provide a legal framework for them to make their allegations, have them investigated, not by a private company and maybe not even by the Gardaí? Why do we keep avoiding granting these people the justice they deserve?
Because I think, Philip, unfortunately, notwithstanding the inroads we've made, and you know, that we've, as a country, we have come to terms with very dark histories in relation to sexual abuse of children in various types of institutions, care institutions, mother and baby homes, etc., industrial schools, all of it. You know, I mean, my mind, when I turn my mind to it, I mean, we have a very dark history, and you know, I think we're only slowly coming to accept that this is unfortunately part of our history, and it's not going to go away, but it is still happening. And I mean, to launch an investigation in 2021 in relation to abuse of a young adult woman in a respite centre during COVID, using a document of 2005, Trust in Care Policy 2005, to me shows that the HSE and all its invested agencies, you know, who work with it and for it, really have no proper concern that their policies are out of date, are not in keeping with society as it is now today. And above all, people have been talking about safeguarding legislation for years. We have it in the North, we have it in the UK, we don't have it here. Why not? And why is the HSE, why are the various governmental departments dragging their heels in relation to getting this over the finish line? Because if you have, it's like when you go to a court with a vulnerable adult. It's like the solicitor who came out and made this very important statement, Solicitor General of the Ward and Courts Office. I'm sorry, her name has just gone out of my head, but she was there as a voice for Grace in the course of the process that the Farrelly Commission dealt with. So she was like an advocate for Grace, a very important position. It's like a guardian ad litem in a childcare case. That's the child's voice. That's the child's advocate. They're only there for the child. So if you have a safeguarding person for a vulnerable adult or a vulnerable child in place that can come into a facility and say, no, sorry, I'm coming in. I want to see the bedroom. I want to see the toilet facilities. I want to check her clothes. I want to see what her care plan is. I want this, and this. And it cannot be refused. Then you have oversight, Philip. You have proper oversight. And you have somebody independent who is only answerable to the child or the vulnerable adult.
It's amazing to think that after 100 years of the Republic that we're still struggling to get these things together. Caitlin, in this instance, if this does come to court, etc., she may be required to take the witness stand to be questioned about the things that she said. How does she feel about that? Because not only do you have the sort of the trauma of what happened to her, but now you have that has to be relived on the witness stand, which, as we all know, is a very intimidating place to be.
Absolutely. Well, the situation is we have to be very mindful that Caitlin has suffered a trauma, and she has received medical care and attention in relation to that to help her cope. But I mean, there are times when the situation that she experienced, the trauma that she suffered, does, I suppose, erupt, and it has caused a significant deterioration in her behavior, in her emotions over the last number of years, Philip. So it is a matter of concern for us as her legal representatives in relation to how she will cope with court proceedings and everything that goes with that. But by the same token, I feel that she will be able to manage that situation with the support of her mother and other proper supports that we're going to put in place for her around that time. And at the end of the day, it's her voice that needs to be heard. And no matter how that voice comes across in court, it needs to be heard.
How are Caitlin and Louise at this moment, Caoimhe? Are they able to get on with their lives, or was a pause button pressed by this incident during COVID and they're just waiting for the resolution of this before they can move on?
Yeah, no, this has been all consuming for the last number of years. You know, it's taken a particular toll on Louise, and I can say that, and I know Louise won't mind, really taken a very hard toll on her. And as I said, she's remarkable for her strength and how she keeps going one foot in front of the other. As for Caitlin, because of what I am saying, and this is my personal opinion, Philip, is retaliation and penalisation against Louise in relation to raising questions and, you know, putting questions to Evista regularly about how is Caitlin getting on, and being told then, we don't like your questions, we don't like the way you're communicating with us. It has meant that Caitlin has dropped out of attending her day service facilities, which is what she resumed back into once COVID was over. And also with that is the fact that the facility are claiming they can't provide what they say Louise has looked for as a bespoke service. I mean, this is just ridiculous, Philip. They are accusing Louise of demanding a bespoke service that they can't provide. Now, that is just utter nonsense. What Louise has highlighted on many occasions is that there's inconsistency with staff workers who work with Caitlin, chopping and changing. You know, there's day activities that it is documented Caitlin does not like, but yet she's sort of lumped in with groups and she has to do these activities because of her autism spectrum. You know, Caitlin is very inclined to routine. She likes things a particular way. That's just the way it is. But that's not been taken into consideration. And then by the same token, Louise is accused of being demanding. But as it happens, as of today, Louise is meeting with the Evista team following a detailed assessment report which Senator Clonan raised in the Seanad, and that took very many months, and again we had to push to get sight of that. So it's a detailed assessment report which essentially is an long overdue, up-to-date care assessment plan for Caitlin for her needs. And it was multidisciplinary, involving psychology, speech and language, social work, and sorry, I just can't remember the fourth one. But in any event, that is now there. It's a lengthy document. It's a fair document. It's tailor-made for Caitlin, and it's been discussed today by the Evista team with Louise. But here's the other thing, Philip. It won't be implemented until Evista decide on a business plan with the HSE. So again, we're faced with another delay, more tick boxing, more processes, more layers, and meanwhile, Caitlin, her deterioration because of a lack of daily routine and a lack of activity is going down, 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 down.
Is there no other alternative available to Caitlin? Because obviously nobody wants to be in a situation where they're looking for care from somebody that they're in conflict with, but there's nothing else on offer from the HSE. This is the only show in town, is it?
Well, I suppose there's multi-factors to consider there. I mean, Louise is a single mom. They live in a particular area of Dublin. So, you know, there'd be transport issues. You know, then there's the familiarity. One of the big factors that we had to look at in all of this, and we had a mediation process in December of 2023 to try and resolve communication issues, which unfortunately wasn't successful. But what we've had to look at is Caitlin has been familiar with this service all her life. She's kind of grown up through the Ard Coon, through the Evista facilities all her life. So to take her out of that now at this stage would probably be detrimental to her mental health and welfare. It would be very difficult for Louise as well from a travelling perspective and getting Caitlin from A to B. So what we would like is Respite is a different issue. That's a separate issue. All we want at this stage, Philip, is for Avista to put back in place day services, which is 2, maybe 3 days a week. That's all. It's not much to ask.
It's a ridiculous question for me to ask as well, because, like, you know, why should the victim be removed rather than the people who are responsible for whatever it was that she was subjected to? Caoimhe, we will leave it there for now. This is a case that is going to go on and on and on, and I honestly hope that on the steps of the court that some resolution will be found. But if it's not, we'd very much like for you to, and Caoimhe, or for you and Caitlin and Louise to keep in touch with us here on MOTH News, because we'd like to continue recovering this story. But for now, Caoimhe, thank you very much for joining us.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Philip, for having me, for Caitlin and Louise.
Thank you all very much for watching and for listening. That was Caoimhe Haughey from CM Haughey Solicitors, and it is a case that we will continue to follow. I think we're going to be live a little bit later on this afternoon as well. As I say, my name is Philip O'Connor. You are watching MOTH News Live, and we'll be back again soon talking about the stories of today. But for now, have a great afternoon.